times like this, we need to tell our tale. It's Shakespeare's birthday. He knew how to pen fine plots that hang like pictures from a nail, great lines like "When shall we three meet again?" And none of us are Shakespeare, that is true, but in dramatic times our voices can illuminate the lives of me and you. The world is spinning loose without a plan, and we're all dizzy, but we have to speak about the way we sometimes start to cry as lockdown stretches out another week. You have to carry on, you have to try. We are like Hamlet. He knew that it is to be or not to be in times like this.
Ian McMillan is a poet and performer from Yorkshire, as well as a playwright and journalist. He writes and performs his own work for both adults and children, is a tireless champion of poetry and the spoken arts, and a campaigner for the arts to be for everybody. He was described by Poet Laureate Carol Ann Duffy as world-class, one of today's greatest poetry performers, and is one of Britain's best-known broadcasters. He lives in Darfield, the village of his birth. He's been described in the Radio Times as the 22nd most powerful person in radio. He is also styled poet in residence to his hometown football club, Barnsley FC. In celebration of the UK's 2012 National Pie Week, Ian McMillan wrote a poem devoted to the creations of the pie village of Denby Dale.
Well, I'm living about 700 yards from where I was born, so I've always lived in this village near Barnsley called Darfield. My mother was from the next village. My dad was from Scotland, and they met as pen pals in the war. So in the war, single service people could write to each other. So my dad's in the Navy, my mother's in the WAFs, and they wrote to each other. And they wrote to each other for about 18 months before they met. Then they kept trying to meet for afternoon tea in the Queen's Hotel in Leeds, and because of the wartime trains, they kept missing each other. Eventually, they met a couple of times. They got married on a 48-hour pass, and they ended up having one night together in the Tontine Hotel, Peebles. Then my dad disappeared on secret war work, and so my dad, when he left the Navy, my mother stayed down here. My dad kept coming back here, kept being away for a couple of years at a time. When he left the Navy, they settled down here. So I've always lived here, and I was lucky enough because of this place to go to a West Riding County Primary School in the 1960s, and the West Riding of Yorkshire was a fantastic educational establishment run by a man called Sir Alec Clegg, who was one of the great experimentalists and forward thinkers in education, and he said that all children are creative. So in my school, we had singing, we had dancing, we had art, we had pottery, but most of all, we had poetry. And so that was when I first encountered poetry, and I thought, gosh, I could be a poet. And my teachers all encouraged me to do that. So the place that I'm sitting in every way possible, has made me the person I am.
You talk about this encouragement to be creative quite a lot, because I've read quite a lot of stuff, and it is extraordinary to think how little people, even children even now, are encouraged to think creativity can be a career.
In a sense, it was more than a career. It was seen as just a thing that you did. It was seen as being part of your life. Part of your life was being creative. Part of your life was as much as being mechanical or being practical or being thoughtful, then creativity was seen as that. It wasn't really in those days seen as a career, to be honest with you, because you would go to the local library and most of the books were written by people from Surrey, not from Barnsley. But then, and I remember at secondary school, somebody saying to me, I wrote an essay, and at the bottom of the essay, I put Ian McMillan, future Nobel Prize for Literature. And this teacher said, Ian, Nobel Prize winners don't come from Barnsley. So the idea that maybe you could make a living from it wasn't encouraged, but the idea that it could be part of your makeup were. And so it took a while for me to realise that actually you could make a living doing this. And it was seeing people on the shelves like Barry Hines, Stan Barstow, that kind of person who lived round here and actually made a living at writing, although Barry Hines, after he'd had success to the Kessel for a Knave, then moved to London and wrote a book that's now forgotten called First Signs. So the pull of London was always there. And another one of my teachers said, look, Ian, you must move to London. You must move to London if you want to make a living at this. And even in those days, I kind of disagreed and thought, well, actually, you could make a living around here. And luckily, I've managed that, although not a lot of my contemporaries did move down to London and made a living down there.
You do draw an enormous amount of inspiration from where you are and the society you're in. I mean, one of the things you talk about, and there's a lovely poem you wrote about seeing the Coalboard film when you were quite young.
Yes.
I mean, what was it like? Were you ever tempted to go down the pit?
I mean, the Coalboard film was just this. Every term we get shown these films from the Coalboard that said, Britain needs coal and Britain needs miners. And in the poem, I described the fact that Mr. Challenger, our teacher, what a great name for a teacher, Mr. Challenger, he said, look, we've got to show you this film, but we haven't got a projector. So we had to watch it in the cloakroom. And so we go in the cloakroom and you're watching it on the back of duffel coats and gabardines and pegs sticking out. And we're watching this film and it was the world's oldest projector. And as we were watching it and these men are going down the pit, suddenly the projector caught fire. And the film started going backwards, and these men ran backwards out of the pit. It's some kind of terrible metaphor for what was about to happen. But it's true that when I was at school, my dad left the Navy in 1958 when I was 2, because I was born in 1956. And then he went to work in Sheffield in a firm of architects, and he was like the company secretary. But I thought he never told me what he did, so I thought he was an architect. So when we filled in this form with a little graph at school, what my dad does, everybody else's dad worked down the pit, apart from Gillian Wilkinson's dad, who was a butcher, and Zoe Rothin's dad, who was the caretaker, Mr. Rothin, and my dad. And they said, what does he do? I said, I think he's an architect. So there was always this idea that the pit provided everything. You know, it provided a good living, but also it provided brass bands, choirs, football teams, cricket teams. It was a cradle to grave kind of socialism that's sort of disappeared now. And the idea was that, again, a bit like in Kestrel for a Knave, you know, you'd have these careers talks where they go, look, you're very clever. You don't have to go down the pit. You can work in the pit offices. So that was kind of the thing of it. But everywhere around here was just built around the pit. So I remember I've just been on my afternoon stroll and I went down to where the pit used to be. And I was reminded of an old man I used to see called Jim, who would walk past a man called George, and they'd walk past each other, and one of them would say, Utopia, Jim. He said, Utopia, George. And they'd walk past each other. And it was like, it's always felt like that to me. This place has felt like a place full of legend and myth and story. And also, you know, when I walked down to the pit where it was, I walked past ASOS, as seen on screen, the massive, massive warehouse there for ASOS, which is employing 4,000 people at the moment. So the thing about this region is it's a place on the cusp of change. You know, it's not as though I lived in a mining area in somewhere like the Forest of Dean, which hasn't moved on a great deal. Whereas here, so many things have happened, so many things have changed that you feel like, although this is seen as a backwater, I've always seen it as a kind of cultural vortex with all kinds of things happening that you just have to glance out the window and there they are. Not many people call Barnsley a cultural vortex, but I'm allowed to.
Reading your poetry, reading your writings, it seems that almost anything can give you inspiration. I mean, trains, for instance. What is it about trains?
Trains, you know, I never thought I would miss sitting on an overcrowded pacer train that sounded like a flock of seagulls crying in the dark. But I do. The thing about trains is they're a bit like small, smelly TARDISes, in that you'll get on the train in Barnsley at 10 to 8, you'll get off the train in Huddersfield at 20 to 9, and somehow all kinds of things have happened. You've encountered people, you've looked out the window, you've appeared to fly across the amazing Penistone Viaduct, and also you're kind of slipping into people's lives very briefly, and you're looking. I often think about this thing I saw, in fact I wrote about it when I was on the train once going from Sheffield to Manchester, and just before you get to the big tunnel at Totley, it slowed down very much by some houses, and a woman just stood up and took her top off, and like pressed her breasts into the window, and you think, blimey. And as this is true, as this happened, a man in the seat in front of me turned around and said, "Do you know the works of André Gide?" I said, "Do you mean André Gide?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "No, I don't." He said, somebody gave me this André Gide book. He said, "I don't understand it. Here you are." I said, did you see that? He said, no, I didn't see it. So things like that couldn't happen anywhere else. A man used to walk, there used to be a man on the train from Barnsley to Huddersfield, and on his money bag it would say, "Giz your brass and shut up." And every time he walked past you, he would say, "Do you know, Ian?" He knew me. He said, "Do you know, Ian, I don't have to do this. I'm a trained golf course designer." And I thought, you would never get that if you were in a car. You'd never get that. And I think it's just what you said earlier, the idea that anything for me can be inspiration. So as you know, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I get up very early every morning and I go on my early morning stroll and I tweet about it. I tweet about what I see. And that just gets me going in the morning. And I'm a big fan of the quotidian, of the everyday. So you're walking around and you see things. And my task every day is to walk the same walk every morning and see new things every morning. And I think, any writers watching this, any artist watching this, I would say, train yourself to notice the everyday, because the everyday, as they say, ubiquity is everywhere, isn't it? It's around us all the time. So, and it's never dull. It's always interesting. Things always happen. People say to me, "Do you make this stuff up on your early stroll?" I say, "Well, I wish I could. But there's too much happening. I would if things stopped happening." Oh dear.
When was the moment you realised you could make a living of your creative ability?
I did see it as a kind of thing that I wanted to do from being about 12 or 13. I thought, I want to do this. And I was encouraged at school, encouraged at junior school and secondary school. They said you got to move to London, but they said you might be able to do it. But I didn't know quite what to do. Who were the models? What do you do? And I had this very specific in my head. I often think about this. I've written about it, of me sitting at a desk and I've got a suit on. I've got this green corduroy suit and there's leather patches on the elbows. And I'm writing a novel. And I'm writing this novel. And every so often, I'm looking up and I'm going, oh yeah. And I'm going out and I'm having a cup of tea and I'm coming back and I'm writing the novel. And then I get a letter. And in the letter, it says something like, "Oh, we've sold the first British serial rights to your next novel." So I'm writing this novel. At the same time, I'm writing poems. I'm really writing poems. And I've discovered that I can make people laugh at school. And I think, well, there must be something there where I can not only write, but I can talk about writing. So I was writing poems. I joined a band. Me and my mates formed a band, Oscar the Frog, Barnsley's first folk rock band. We didn't have any. I was the drummer. I had no drums. I had to play giant Tupperware I had no drumming sticks. I had to have knitting needles. So, and our first gig was at Darfield Church Hall. This fella from the youth club, Roland McCardle, he said, "You lads got a band?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you perform at the Jumble Sale on Saturday?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What we'll do is we'll open the curtains. You give them 20 minutes. We'll shut the curtains." I said, "Right." We opened the curtains. We started. Nobody took any notice of us at all. We just carried on buying the stuff, and I played the blooming things, and they shut the curtains. But it was a fantastic gig. I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. So I thought, right, I can do things. I can do a mixture of things. I didn't understand the phrase at the time, but what I was talking about was a kind of portfolio career that we've all had. So then I'm writing poems, and I thought, where can I go to read these poems aloud? And the place you go would be the folk club, the local folk club. There were loads of folk clubs who were very welcoming places. And you go in, and I'd say, "Can I read a few poems?" Me and my mate read some poems. And so you read some poems. Somebody else would sing a shanty. Somebody else would sing a song they'd written themselves. Somebody else would sing a Bob Dylan song. And they liked it, or they didn't like it, or it went down well or badly. But it didn't matter, because it taught you how to stand up in public and perform. And then somebody said, "Could you do us half an hour?" "Oh, yeah, I'll do half an hour." So we'll give you £5. £5, half an hour. Okay, so we did half an hour. We did things we thought were really funny. Like I thought, if you sing tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree backwards, I get loads of laughs. Got no laughs. Ribbon yellow, that's actually alcohol. And then if I sing Chattanooga Choo Choo whilst eating 2 bags of crisps and don't swallow any, get a load of laughs. Got no laughs. Eating these crisps. At the end, they go, "Well, two lads making the way there." And he gave us a £5. And they thought, gosh, you could exchange this kind of thing for money. And then it kind of grew from there. So you get odd gigs here and there. I remember I'd had a few poems published in magazines, and there was a pub called the Sow and Pigs in Toddington, just at the back of Toddington Services. And they used to have this poetry group, and they booked me and my mate to read with the wonderful poet Roy Fisher, who is one of my favourite poets. So can you do 10 minutes with Roy Fisher, 10 minutes each, give you £6. I went, right. So we go down there, and it turned out the bloke who was organising it was drunk. And so as we stood up, his drunkenness showed the fact he started selling veg. So I stood up to the plough, going, carrots, get your carrots here, get your veg. And this bloke next to me goes, I'm going to kill him. I'm killing him. He does that again. And this other fellow went, no, it's all right. The drink has destroyed him. And he stood up going, get your cauliflower. So I'm thinking, is this the literary life? Is this what it is? And then the most amazing thing happened. They calmed this fella down. I'm reading my poems. Roy Fisher's sitting there. In comes Jack Trevor Story, this old novelist and television writer who runs in with goggles on and a flying hat and a cape. And it turns out he's the president of the Toddington Poetry Society. And he came in running around. I don't know why he was dressed like that. Running around shouting, people, I am the president. I thought, wow, I want to be part of this world. I got £6 for that. And so I'm getting gigs, odd gigs here and there. I was working on a building site and getting gigs. And then I thought, I want to try and make this as a living. And at the time, Yorkshire Arts Association, who were one of the Arts Council kind of regional bodies, were giving out these grants that give you up to £1,000 if you gave your job up. And my wife has always been wonderfully supportive of my parents. She was working as a teacher at the time. And I said, look, I'd like to give you a job up. They're going to give you £1,000. Went, go on then. So I applied for this £1,000. And this is 1983. And they didn't give me £1,000. They gave me £800, which is interesting because £1,000 isn't that different to £800. Still a lot of money in them days. But psychologically, it felt less. I don't know, £800. But then they went, go on then. Give your job up if you want. Go on. So I did. I was working at a tennis ball factory at the time. And I gave my job up and I went, right, I'm here. I'm here now. World, come on. Because nothing happens. So then you start whirling round, doing all kinds of things. So my mate was organising writing workshops for the WEA, the Workers' Educational Association. So I started doing writing workshops. I started writing reviews for the NME. I wrote this review for the NME. Used to write the review. I went to see Soft Cell at Retford Porterhouse Club. I stupidly arrived, thinking this started at 8. They didn't get on until 2 a.m. My mate had to give me a lift home. He charged me petrol money. I wrote the review. I had to type it out. I had to get on the bus to Barnsley. I had to put it on the Red Star parcel. It went down there. I got £18 for the review and it cost me £14 to send it. But I thought, oh, I'm a £4 profit. I used to get something like £15 for these writers' workshops. And then Rotherham Arts Centre rang up and said, look, we're doing lunchtime cabarets. Can you do a lunchtime cabaret for £6? I said, yes, I can. So it became like that. And you gradually build up little bits of money here and there. Rotherham Council said, do you want to go into a school and read some poems? I went, yeah. And it just builds from that. So my advice always to anybody who wants to become freelancers, and you'll know this, Chris, if anybody asks you to do anything, just say yes. And you say yes, and it leads to adventures. And if it's no fun, they won't ask you again. But on the way, you'll have met some people and you'll have had a good time or a bad time. But if you say yes, then you get known as the person who says yes. And also, I always agree with that thing that Clive James said when he said, always look pleased to be there. You know, your viewers are pleased to be there. But if you're interviewed on a tiny local radio station or on a Radio 4, be pleased to be there because they've asked you. And if you do that, then it leads to adventures. And gradually, this is 1983, since then, you know, things have built and built and built. And I haven't had a day off since, to be honest with you. It's just through saying yes, which is great. I can't believe me. Look, you know, I'm 64 now, you know, and I'm trying to wind down towards retirement. Although my wife said retire from what, which is true. But, you know, just trying to wind your way down. But I'm amazed that I've had this career for 30 odd years, since 1983, by just saying yes and being kind of willing and able. And I don't know, it's a fascinating thing, fascinating.
As well as the poetry's part of this, but there you are in Yorkshire. And as I was growing up, I was a cricket fan, so there was Surrey, but there was Yorkshire. And you couldn't play for Yorkshire if you weren't born in Yorkshire. And then I went to university in pretend Yorkshire, which is York. And the first time I became aware of the language, I was in the Shambles, and there was this very glamorous married couple. And the guy said to the woman, "It's all right, darling, I'll go and put it in boot." I thought, so there is something, and you're very attracted to the language. You've even, and the county, you've even written a book about In Search of Yorkshire. I mean,
yes.
What is it about Yorkshire, this extraordinary county?
It is extraordinary. I mean, it's in a sense, it's a bit like Britain's Texas, because it always believes that things are bigger there and better. And it believes, in a sense, it believes its own myth that things are bigger and better. And it is hard to kind of define it because I've always been here. You know, if you'd arrived from somewhere else, then you say, oh, that's what it is. But to me, it seems to be based around a sort of an opposition. So if people say things, you go, well, that can't be right. My mate Tony Husband, the cartoonist, says that it's just all we ever say. So any question you're asked will be replied to via the prism of Yorkshire. So they'll go, it's quite sunny today, isn't it? Yes, but I bet it's even warmer in Yorkshire. Or how much is that bag of crisps? Well, we probably pay less for it in Yorkshire. So it's like Yorkshire is the lens through which you view everything. I mean, it's a mixture of places. It's a great industrial centre. It was one of the vortexes, I've said that word again, one of the crucibles of the Industrial Revolution. But also it has this kind of town and country vibe where the two are sort of meshed against each other, by which I mean that people from North Yorkshire will say, well, this is proper Yorkshire. And people from West Yorkshire will say, well, this is proper Yorkshire. And people from South Yorkshire will say, well, this is proper Yorkshire. So, for example, I went to see Yorkshire once at Headingley play Leicester. And Leicester were thrashing Leicestershire. And this man stood up and said, come on, Yorkshire, they only make shoes, which is a great line. But then if we're playing a team from Lancashire at football, Barnsley playing Lancashire team, like Bolton or somebody, the Lancashire thing is they all shout, Lancashire, tra-la-la, Lancashire, tra-la-la. But we shout, Yorkshire, Yorkshire. But then if we're playing Huddersfield shout West Yorkshire, and we shout South Yorkshire. So there's so around here, there'll be Barnsley, will have a bit of a rivalry with Sheffield. We always see Sheffield as the cultural Hoover, an economic Hoover that just sucked everything out of the other three towns in South Yorkshire, Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster. Barnsley and Doncaster have a rivalry. Darfield has a rivalry with Wombwell. The top end of Darfield has a rivalry with Low Valley. Low Valley sees people from New Scarborough, the bottom end of Low Valley, as being a bit rough. So to me, it's a sort of ripple effect around Yorkshire. Yorkshire is a kind of, I tell you what it's like that bit at the end of The Great Escape, where Steve McQueen's trying to get over the thing. And one day you're going to see him get over, but he never does. And Yorkshire's like that. It's like you can never leave, but you're also, everywhere you are, it's got these little things of barbed wire that say your bit of Yorkshire is the best. So I think that's what it is. So I get called that weird thing. Oh, is he the professional Yorkshireman? What a weird thing. What a strange thing that is. I always say, well, it's better than being an amateur Northamptonshire man. But also, what does it mean? Do they mean that you're kind of putting this on? That this voice, that I'm actually talking like Prince Charles in the house? That can't be that. It just means that somehow they think that you are playing on and underlining your innate Yorkshireness to get things happened. I don't know. I mean, recently I was given the freedom of Barnsley, which was a great thing. I got this letter from the mayor and I daren't open it. So my wife opened it and said, they've offered you the freedom of Barnsley. I thought, wow, that is an honour. That really is an honour. So I rang them up. They said, will you accept it? I said, well, look, can I get to march my sheep up Market Hill? And they went, no. I said, well, do I get a big, daft comedy key? They said, no. I said, can I go and watch the mighty Barnsley FC for nothing? They said, no, you can't. I said, can I go in any shops and get goods free? They said, no. I said, what do I get then? And they said, you get a certificate. So I must have sounded disappointed because they went, it's framed. I went, all right. So then I went to get my honorary, my freedom of Barnsley. And Dickie Bird is sitting there. Dickie Bird, who's also got the freedom of Barnsley. I said, Dickie, do you get free parking? He says, I've looked into that, Ian, lad, no chance. But then, my brother and his wife and my wife, we all went to this ceremony. And they give you the freedom of Barnsley, and it's great. And it's in this tube, this plastic tube. Then my brother had to get off, so we had to give him a lift home. So I actually left my freedom of Barnsley at the town hall in this tube. And the mayor rang up and she said, you've left your casket. I said, I'm not dead. I am not dead. You're giving the freedom of Barnsley. She went, no. So then the mayor's chauffeur-driven car had to pull up outside our house. And the mayor's chauffeur had to give me this casket. I thought, blimey. As I've always said, Chris, there is never any point making anything up. As you know, you just stand there for a bit and things just coalesce around you. Oh, dear.
Adult fiction. I always loved libraries, the quiet of them, the smell of the plastic covers and the paper and the tables and the silence of them. The silence of them that, if you listened, wasn't silence. It was the murmur of stories held for years on shelves and the soft clicking of the date stamp, the soft clickety-clicking of the date stamp. I used to go down to our little library on a Friday night in late summer, just as autumn was thinking about turning up, and the light outside would be the colour of an everyman cover, and the lights in the library would be soft as anything, and I'd sit at a table and flick through a book and fall in love with the turning of the leaves, the turning of the leaves. And then, at 7 o'clock, Mrs. Dove would say, in a voice that wasn't too loud so it wouldn't disturb the books, 7 o'clock, please. And as I was the only one in the library's late summer rooms, I would be the only one to stand up and close my book and put it back on the shelf with a sound like a kiss, back on the shelf with a sound like a kiss. And I'd go out of the library, and Mrs. Dove would stand for a moment silhouetted by the adult fiction, and then she'd turn the light off and lock the door and go to her little car and drive off into the night that was slowly turning the colour of ink, and I would stand for 2 minutes, and then I'd walk over to the dark library and just stand in front of the dark library.
Why are libraries so important, do you think?
I think libraries are some of the few spaces that aren't corporately owned. So you can walk into a library and nobody's trying to sell you anything. Libraries are still free. You can go into and you can get any book. You can order a book through Interlibrary Loan. To me, a library in a village or a town is the moral and cultural and spiritual centre of that place, where everybody is equal, where anybody can go in and borrow books. So luckily, Barnsley libraries are a good library authority. We've just got a brand new library called the Light Box, massive library in the middle of Barnsley. They've kept Darfield Library open. It's shut at the moment because of the virus, but they're reopening libraries. Darfield Library used to be in a little shop, used to be a shop down the bottom of Darfield, where the librarian, Mrs. Dove, because it used to be a shop, there was a Rington's tea sign on the window. If you could get Mrs. Dove bending down at a particular place near the adult fiction, you could get the words Rington's tea back to front on her head. It was always a little thing with me and my mates. But then the West Riding, God bless it, built this new library in 1965. The plaque is still there. April the 1st, 1965, the new library opened, and it's still there. And it was opened the same year as the new community centre and the new care home. You know, again, a bit of local authority socialism that said, look, we can all do this. We all walked up from the school in a crocodile, and there's Mrs. Dove sat on a high stool, and I've never seen so many Biggles books, and it was great. And I thought, God, this is the place, and I still believe that. I believe, and of course, we know that libraries have had a battering. They've had a real battering because of austerity. I agree with Alexis Sale when he said, what part of austerity is to do with shutting libraries in Wolverhampton? You know, libraries should be opening. That's why I'm proud that Barnsley's opened this big new one. And we have got very soon. They've employed some, they call them transformational officers, to try and get more people going into libraries. So yeah, I am a huge fan of libraries. The trouble is, I mean, I'm a member of the library, but because I do my Radio 3 show, The Verb, every day books arrive at my house. I could give them some books. So I do kind of go down the library and borrow a book, but then it has to go on the pile with all these other books I've got to read. So what you want is, I would like there to be one of the things that you look forward to maybe when all this is over is, let's have some new libraries. Let's have a library at the end of every street. Let's have every village having a library. Let's have more mobile libraries. Because what this pandemic is proving is that actually, when they say there's no money, they're kidding. They go, actually, no, there is some money. Oh, yeah. So people like you are keeping a library open. Fantastic. The more libraries, the better, I think. Sometimes I think the name puts people off, with the word library. You know, I don't know, it's like, we know that library, museum, arts centre, theatre, although they're places that we love, the names of them can put people off. Oh, I'm going to walk into that place and clever people are going to ask me questions. One other thing that might come out of this terrible time is that maybe there'll be a kind of democratisation of these spaces so that everybody will feel comfortable in them. I do hope that's the case. But yes, I'm a big fan of the library. And it's a sad thing to see it shut as I walk by. I often tell the story of my oldest grandson, Thomas, who's now 15. When I first joined him in the library when he was about 1.5, he was so excited he wet himself. And I thought, that is what we want. In that I'm not saying mass incontinence is a good thing, but I think we should be that excited to join the library.
When you read your stuff, there's a problem, I think, with poetry a little bit. You know, you're a poet, but you don't know it, which used to be said all the time. It looks deceptively easy, but you and I know it isn't easy. You don't just toss a poem off, do you?
Well, you know, I think what I love most about poetry is, I mean, I read a lot of poetry, I read a lot of prose. And to me, what I like about poetry is the white space at the end of the line. The white space is the thing that makes it a poem. People say, what makes that a poem? I say, look at that space there. You're not going to get that in a piece of prose. And the white space tells you where the breath ends, where the idea ends, where that could link into the next line. It's a thing about modernism in a way. And I think that's what I try and recreate in poetry. I try and recreate the kind of excitement of the white space. With prose, I always think you build prose from the building block of the sentence. I'm a huge fan of the sentence. I love sentences so much. Somehow Americans can write sentences better than us. You know, F. Scott Fitzgerald, what a great sentence writer. John Cheever, what a great sentence writer. Partly because, and this sounds facetious, but it's not, it's true, partly because their place names seem to take us somewhere. You know, you go to Medicine Hat in a sentence, is not the same as going to Walsall. I like Walsall. I've been to Walsall many times, but somehow Walsall doesn't have the same kind of ring as Medicine Hat. But somehow Americans can write these sentences. And if I talk to prose writers, I say, tell me about your sentences. Where do you build your sentences from? And they're often interested when I ask them that. I talked to David Sedaris, I interviewed him. I said, tell me about your sentences. He said, you're treating me like a king. Nobody's ever asked me about my sentences before. And to me, if you could think about poetry as white space and prose as sentences, then somehow in the middle, that's where I'm trying to meet myself, I think. And the more I read poetry, the poetry I read for pleasure is people like Roy Fisher, is people like, I've just been reading some Lawrence Ferlinghetti, I've been reading lots of performance poets, poets who can somehow marry the breath and the ink, if you like, you know, so the speaking and the page, they're the ones that I like. So somehow people who can write a poem that works just as well on the page as it does in performance. A lot of my poems only work in performance because they're there to perform in front of an audience that hasn't seen you before and they're out for a good time. Some of the poems only work on the page because you can take your time with them. But to me, the perfect kind of poem is the poem that will work on the page and on the stage. I think that's right. And the thing is, because I've been doing it a long time, you get a bit of practice at it. That's not being falsely modest, but the more you do of it, as with anything, the more you playing the piano, the more you can recognise what it is that you're doing, I think. Yeah.
All art is hard work. I do try to impress this on people who suddenly decide to stop being dentists and start being Henry Moore. That's a true story, by the way. Creativity has a weird place in a lot of people's lives. Somehow it's the thing they ought to have been doing instead of the thing they are doing. And I find it kind of sad sometimes.
Well, it's part of the great British amateur tradition, you know, that somebody will say, well, I fancy just doing a bit of painting. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And it's the thing that people, you're right, they think they should be doing it. And maybe I'm lucky in that because of my schooling, particularly my junior schooling, people said, you can do it. It can be part of what you do. I would love it if it was part of what everybody does. You know, I've done little bits of work for this organisation called Voluntary Arts. I actually want to do arts for fun. Great, let them carry on doing it. Do it all the time, do it as much as you can. The only trouble with that is there's what you call the slipstream effect. So I encourage people all the time to write poems, and so they send me them. And there's not enough hours in the day to read them. You know, so today I've had 2 separate emails from people. One who just sent me this massive file of poems, said, can you read these? And I think, well, I'll have a go. And then somebody else who sent me a massive file of poems last week said, well, have you read them yet? You know, they can't, there's that. So when you encourage people, you've got to be aware that as well as reading this big pile of books, you should, if you're being serious about it, read their stuff as well. But if everybody's a poet and everybody's an artist, then we all have a responsibility, I think, to look at their work and to read their work. And so, for example, there's a guy in our village, Ian Nichols, an artist. He arrived in the village 15 years ago to look after his dad. He's been at Chelsea School of Art. Fantastic artist. He cycled by me 15 years ago. He went, Ian McMillan. I went, yeah. He said, Ian McMillan. He's seen me on the telly. I said, yeah. And we got together, and he kind of, every so often he rings me up, I've got a great idea. You know, we have these long walks. We talk about art. And I like to look at art with him, and we're working together. What I'm saying is that, you know, that if we encourage everybody to do it, which I think we should, then we've got to take the responsibility to look at and read and listen to all their work. And then on the back of that, you get that thing that you'll have come across a lot, the old people not wanting to pay you. You know, so they go, can you do this for us? We haven't got a budget. And you go, oh, I've tried that at Tesco's. I've tried going into Tesco's and go, I haven't got a budget. You know, and you'll go to a gig and they'll go, I won't tell you the name of the festival. There's a festival down south, and they rang my agent up and said, we'd like Ian to come along, but on principle, we don't pay the writers. So he said, all right, on principle. So he always says, how many people are going to be at the gig? And they went, about 100. He said, what are you charging? 10 quid. So you got 1,000 quid coming in. Yeah, but we don't pay the artist on principle. I like those principles. But so we all do that thing where we'll all do lots of things for nothing, obviously. But that's why I said to people who are starting off in this world, you should eventually hope to get paid, I think.
Well, you talk quite a lot about family. And of course, along comes a son, Andrew, who's also a rather good poet. I mean, did you feel the winds of competition at your back when you arrived?
It was interesting because I've got 3 kids, my 2 daughters and Andrew, and I always took them all to things. They all went along to things with me. And the 2 girls, to be honest with you, were more interested in dancing. They were into dancing. Andrew was always interested in performing. He was in the local youth theatre, which I think always helps you with confidence, doesn't it? And he was in the debating club at school. So he was interested in debate, in performance. And he was also writing things. There used to be a fantastic magazine called Young Writer that came out of Herefordshire. And it was a proper magazine for young writers like Andrew when he was in his early teens or even younger. And he'd write things and they'd pay a little bit and he'd send him a contract. And he then started writing poems and getting poems published in magazines. And I remember in the very early days, he said, you know, should I use a different name? Because we didn't want anybody to think that he's getting the stuff through me. Because he writes very, very different poems to me, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And then he got his first pamphlet out, and then he got this book out that won the Guardian First Book Award. Fantastic. Then he's got a second collection out. He's just working on his 3rd collection. And what's happening now is that people are going, Andrew McMillan. People used to go, like, is he your dad? But now they're going, oh, is he your son? Like, he's getting better known than me, which is fantastic. It really is. And his work's very different to mine. A lot of his work is homoerotic, which mine isn't. You know, so I remember, when his second book came out, he said, I don't think I can show Grandma this. I said, look, Grandma has a lot broader minded than you think. He went, yeah, but maybe not on page 24. I said, no, don't show page 24. But no, it's great. And maybe it shows that if you're surrounded by stuff, then you'll become part of that. And what it showed him was that you can make a living as a writer. That's the example that he had. So it was interesting. He went to Lancaster University to do creative writing in English. He graduated from there, and then he did what I did. He applied for every job he could in terms of residencies and got them all. So he's doing residencies all over the place. And I'm very unusual, Dad, in that I've never said to my kids, you've got to get a proper job, because I've never had a proper job. But he was all over the country doing these residencies and enjoying them. But then he said, I quite fancy having a proper job. I went, oh, son of mine. And then he eventually he worked at John Moores University in Liverpool, and now he works at Manchester Met. And he loves it, and he's got a job, and he's writing poems. And no, it's a fantastic thing. But when he rings up, and him and my wife will have a chat, and then my wife will say, I'll pass you on to your dad, see if he's got any poetry news. So that's all we talk about. But tomorrow, we're off to Cleethorpes to see my wife's mother at her caravan and have some wonderful fish and chips. And my son and his partner are coming along, so we'll all be sitting having fish and chips. And then somebody will say, you'll be writing a poem about this. So that's what they always say to you. It happens all the time. You know, I go in the shop and I go, can I have a tin of beans? They go, hey, he'll be writing a poem about this. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. He'll put it in a poem. I remember I was once walking down the street in Darfield, and this woman was crossing the zebra crossing, and a car zoomed past, nearly hit her. She went, hey, put that in a poem. As though I'm some kind of town crier. Oh, dear me. It's great fun, Chris. I've got to tell you. This is great. I'm enjoying this.
You have had a couple of sinecure jobs. You were the poet in residence at the English National Opera, and you're poetry in residence at Barnsley Football Club. I'm not quite sure what that means.
English National Opera one was interesting. It was a fella called Rowley. I've forgotten his second name now. Rowley somebody. This guy Rowley left Radio 3 and went to work for English National Opera. And he rang up and said, would you like to be the poet in residence for English National Opera? I said, what would it entail? He said, well, we're going to launch our new season. We'd like to write a poem about every opera we're doing in the season and perform it at this opening night when we have a little preview and people are going to get dressed up in the costumes, sing a few arias, you do a few poems. That was it. That was all I did. That was the end of that. And that was kind of one of those kind of PR jobs. And it's still on my CV, point residence. The Barnsley Football Club one was interesting. That's like a life peerage. I've never been paid anything for that. That was, what happened was Barnsley FC in 1997, a long time ago, were about to get promoted to the Premier League. Me and my mate, a head teacher whose school I'd been into doing poetry, Barnsley fans, were in the pub. And one of those ideas where the more beer you have, the better the idea gets. You think, I'll tell you what, let's ring them up. Ring them up now. See if they want a poet. Ring them up. So you ring them up and go, look, do you fancy having a poet in residence? And they went, all right, come and see us. So I went to see this fella who was in charge. And I said, look, the first thing he said, are you a Barnsley fan? I said, yeah. He said, what would this entail? I said, I'll just write poems. And he said, all right. He said, we can't pay you anything. And I thought, well, you're just about to go in the Premier League. You got plenty of money. But then I thought, this will lead to all kinds of things. And it did. So what it was, the Press Association, the PA, put out a little press release that said Barnsley's first Premiership signing. And it was in all the papers. And suddenly it went mad. I was everywhere. I was all over the world. People are ringing me up. I'm doing all these kinds of things. My only duties were I had to write a poem every week for the Barnsley Chronicle about the match we'd just done. And the Chronicle rang up and said, look, it's got to be 16 lines long and it's got to fit in this space. I said, right. Sometimes I'd write one that was a bit longer. They just won't print the last 2 lines. And people are going, your poem ended abruptly. Is it that modern poetry? And then my ambition was to have one of my poems chanted on the terraces. And we had a German goalkeeper called Lars Lees. And I wrote this poem that went, Lars Lees, listen please, we think you're very good. Lars Lees, listen please, we think you're very good. No, it went, Lars Lees, tall as the trees, we think you're very good. Lars Lees, listen please. Anyway, something like that. And they're chanting this thing. And then when I met Lars Lees, he said, by the way, I'm not called Lars Lees, I'm called Lars Laser. So I got it totally wrong. But what it means is that, you know, these days, even 25 years later, I'm at the match and somebody will go, put that in your poem. Put that in your poem. So it's the idea of the public poet. The other one that I did was poet in residence at Humberside Police. And that was a very interesting one, 2003. I did an after-dinner speech for a big mob of chief constables at this posh hotel in Scunthorpe called the Forest Pines. And they're all sitting there in the uniform. And at the end, the chief constable of Humberside, a guy called David Westwood, who, in fact, we had on the Big Read Battle of the Books. We did. He was all dressed, and he had a white glove. He was like Michael Jackson. And I went out, and they're all sitting there in their chauffeur-driven cars. And as I'm walking past his car, his hand came out of this glove, and he went, you could be our poet. I went, what would that entail? He said, you could go anywhere you want and write poems about it. I thought, all right, I'll do that. I didn't realise that, of course, David Westwood was this new chief constable who was sweeping clean in all kinds of ways. And I was kind of the final straw. Not only all this stuff, they got a poet and all. So I was able to go out with the traffic police. I went on a dawn raid in Goole. It was the most amazing thing, this dawn raid in Goole. I met this copper. He spoke like he never thought anybody would ever speak. He went, I'm a man's man. I said, right. He said, we're after 2 people. We're after the bad lad and the daft lad. I'm not bothered about the daft lad. I want the bad lad. I said, right. I said, can I come behind you and write a poem? He said, yes. So what's going to happen is we're going to smash down the door. Then the health and safety officer goes in and puts a blanket down so nobody cuts their feet on the glass. Then you can go in with your poem. I said, right. So they smashed this door down in Goole. The health and safety copper put this blanket down. Then I ran in, and then they all ran in. And then the bad lad ran out, and the daft lad ran out. And they got the daft lad, but not the bad lad. And then the weirdest thing was, this was really early, about 6 a.m. I then had to go and do a morning speech for a conference of junior school teachers in a hotel in Doncaster. And they said, where have you come from? I said, I've come from a dawn raid in Goole. And they didn't believe me. And it's just that thing that, you know, poets can go anywhere. The idea of the poet in residence, you can go anywhere. I think it would be the mid-80s or late 80s, the Poetry Society started this thing called Poets in Places, where they put poets into places. So a guy called Andrew Fussek Peters was poet in residence on an oil rig. They had somebody else who's poet in residence in Marks and Spencer's. So the idea of being in residence, it just means that it leads to things. The one that I did with the police, we made a little film about it for Yorkshire Telly, and it just meant that, you know, poetry's profile was raised. And because I'm somebody who doesn't mind, people often use me as a battering ram when, to put in points in places where they don't often go. I didn't mind doing it, it was kind of ridiculous, but it was a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun. And the only thing that hangs on from it, and it'll be there next season, is there's a fantastic show on Radio Norfolk about football. And if ever Barnsley and Norfolk are in the same league, he rings me up and we have a chat on the radio. It's great. So yeah, point in residence at Barnsley Football Club. I've been part of our long decline, but we managed to stay in the championship by the skin of our teeth this season. Goodness me. The weirdest one of them I ever got, I must tell you this one, was Domestos. Domestos rang up and they said, would you like to write a poem about Domestos? I said, yes. They said, can it be a sonnet? I said, yeah, it can. They said, could it include the phrase, champagne of the smallest room? I said, yes. They said, it's National Toilet Week. Could you write this poem? And then we're going to build a giant wooden toilet in Leicester Square. We'd like you to come down, climb up this ladder, sit in this giant wooden toilet in Leicester Square, read your poem out, and we're going to get all the telly and the radio and the papers there. Big PR event. Now, you know that these PR events often don't work out like they thought they were going to do. So I get there. This is all true. I get there. You've got to be there for 7:30. They built this massive wooden toilet. These chippies are just finishing off building the toilet. They give me my poem framed. I've got this poem under my arm. A tiny woman comes and stands next to me. I didn't know who she was. She's got a big carrier bag, stood next to me. Hello. Then I said, shall I go in the toilet now and read the poem out? They went, no, it's all right, because they haven't come with the papers out yet. They'll be here in a minute, so just wait a minute. She stood there, this woman with the carry bag. Then it starts to dawn on me, but not on them, that nobody's coming. Breakfast, there must be some big news of it. Breakfast telly ring up. Oh, breakfast telly aren't coming. ITV's not coming. Channel 4. Then it gets down and down. Radio London aren't coming. Three Counties radio aren't coming. Hospital radio's not coming. Community radio's not coming. Nobody came. Nobody came at all. We only had the slot for half an hour. At 8 o'clock, they went, right, I said, shall I go and read the poem? I said, there's no point. So then these men unscrewed this toilet, put it in the back of a van, and drove it off. I'm still there, I'm going, well, I'm sorry about that. They went, well, it's not your fault. And then it turns out this little tiny woman who'd been stood next to me was one of the big wigs at Domestos. And she'd come to watch what was happening. And so she was a bit cross because and they spent fortune on all this stuff. So then I said, I'm sorry about that. She went, it's not your fault. Then she held this carrier bag up and she went, I write poems. I went, oh, good. She said, do you want to see some of my poems? Yes, please. So we sat in this coffee shop for about 2 hours, me reading her poems. I thought, God, that is the most expensive writer's workshop you've ever had in your life. So that just came back to that thing I said before about always saying yes. You can be poet in residence anywhere. The only actual media we got from that was Martin Rawson, the fantastic political cartoonist, did this great cartoon of me sitting on this toilet, enormously fat, pooing out poems, going, I do like a nice poem. When I saw him, he gave me a copy of it. Oh, dear me. I wish I was making this up, Chris. I wish I was making this up.
I mean, you are now well known for the Verb on Radio 3.
Yes, the Verb.
Which is great because when I was in television, no one wanted to make anything about poetry. They said, well, there's no audience and, there's too boring. But I mean, I congratulate you. I mean, the Verb's become quite a success for you.
I mean, the thing about the Verb is it's been on for 18 years. It started in 2002, which is astonishing. And I remember I'd done a lot of stuff for Radio 4. I did a series called Booked, which is a quiz which still pops up on 4 Extra. And the producer was a guy called Rob Kettridge. And he said to me, I'm thinking of this new thing on Radio 3. And I said, look, Radio 3, that's the big boys. I listen to Radio 3, that's the big. And I remember I was sat in a hotel in Bournemouth. I'd just done a gig in Bournemouth. And I was in this hotel. It was only me, this is true. It was only me in the hotel and a woman from the think tank Demos. I don't know why she was there. She was doing the Demos, must be doing a thing. And this is true. The hotel breakfast room was completely empty. For some reason, they sat me and this woman at the same table. They said, can you sit there? I said, yeah. She said, what are you doing? I said, I'm just doing a thing. She said, I'm from Demos. And then this has never happened to me before or since. A waiter came in and said, Mr. McMillan, there's a phone call for you in the foyer. Oh, well, you think somebody's died? Bad news. You go out, Radio 3, we're doing this thing. We would like you to pilot for presenting it. I said, all right, I will. And then we did 3 or 4 pilots, and then the Verb came on, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And when it first started, it was on Saturday nights. They were going to originally Saturday Speakeasy, but There was a short-lived speech radio station that had a show called that. I can't remember the name of the station. Then they wanted to call it Pure Verb, which is a line from a Seamus Heaney poem. Then they called it The Verb. But when it was first on, it used to be on after the live opera on a Saturday night. And the live opera, you've got no idea when it's going to end. Because live from the Met, the opera, it ends. We're supposed to be on at 10:30. The opera's still going at 10 to 11. At 11 o'clock, the opera finishes. And you think, oh, great, I'm on. But then they have 10 minutes of applause and the person's describing the bouquets being thrown on the stage. So then it went to a Friday night, which is good. And then it's been up in Manchester, Salford, since 2012. And this very London thing happened where they rang up and said, Ian, good news, you're moving to Salford. I said, you'll think the north is a very small shed. And Barnes is at one end of the shed and Salford's at the other end, because it actually takes me 20 minutes longer to get to Salford. So I can get the train from Doncaster to London in an hour and a half. I get the bus to Barnsley to Sheffield, Sheffield to Huddersfield, Huddersfield to Salford, tram. Takes forever. So anyway, yeah, and it is great. I've got fantastic producers. My producer, Faith Lawrence, so clever, so clever. You know, the other day, the last show of the series, we did a long interview with Salman Rushdie. And I always read the books, because I think on Radio 4, you can get away with going, tell me about your lovely book. Whereas on Radio 3, you've got to have read the book. And you read the book. They're often amazed. You'll know. You go, in your book, they go, have you read the book? Of course I've read the blooming book. And then we said, how can we make this a bit different? We don't want to make this just a biography thing. And then my producer found out he's a big fan of The Wizard of Oz. So we based the whole thing around his love of The Wizard of Oz. So it's stuff like that. It really does expand my brain. At the moment, the verb is off because it's supposed to be the proms, having a shortened prom season. And that's the time when my brain turns to mush. While the verb is on, I'm so clever. Once the verb goes off, I think I'm going to read all these non-verb books. It's not easy. Yes, the verb is a fantastic thing. I still get letters from people saying, you can't talk like that on the radio, but you get fewer of them. I've just been today looking at the proofs of a new pamphlet of poems that I've written, it's kind of like, oh, look, I've just invented Betamax tapes, because all the poems were written before the lockdown, before the crisis. And I thought, well, let them stay there. And, you might write something about the crisis, you might not, but let them stay. So I've just written that. Then I can't see it stopping, to be honest with you. Although I could never write a novel. People said, do you fancy writing a novel? I think you'd have to have a certain kind of concentration to do that. I've enjoyed the fact that this morning, I wrote some words for somebody who's got a choir, and then I'm doing this now, and then later on today, I'll be writing part of my column for the Yorkshire Post. So I know that today I've done a number of things. Whereas if you're doing a novel, you'd have to get up and write a bit of the novel, then go to bed, then get up and write a bit more of the novel. For somebody like me who's got my kind of brain that likes to dip about and dip in and out, I would find that very hard. So I can't see myself writing a novel, but I think I'll keep on writing poems. I like it. I like the idea of like a shelf full. I can't imagine what these 30 are. I've got a bit of a shelf of fame downstairs. I'll just count them up. 30. Although there is another Ian McMillan. There was Ian McMillan who was a novelist, isn't he, from Hawaii. He's now dead. And I tell the story about when I was booked at a school and they thought I was him. And I was met at the station at Newark, Northgate, and I get off the train and there's only one person waiting. And I get off the train, this woman stood there and she's ignoring me. So I went up and I said, are you expecting Ian McMillan? She went, yeah, it's me. And she said, you're nothing like your photo. And it turned out they thought I was the other one.
The canal tells you stories. The canal sings you songs. They hang in that space between memory and water. Once saw a narrowboat raised up, like it was cutting through the air, between two grass walls and the road below, like it was sliding through history. And a tiny vole swam across the water, so a tiny vole swam through history. The canal tells you stories. The canal sings you songs. Once saw a man floating belly up in a canal like he was in the bath. He shouted, "This is the life," as I passed by on a narrowboat. The sky was reflected in the surface and we tied up in places the map never showed us, the man floating by, making ripples on the surface that hang in that place between memory and water. Once got waved at by a jogger as I stood gongoozling on the towpath. Her running gave rhythm to the early afternoon. Dog strollers and kids who'd rather be here than sitting in school. To gongoozle is to stand and watch narrowboats pass, and a canal is a lesson, a water-based school. The canal tells you stories. The canal sings you songs. Once these canals were information highways, if coal and iron can be information, and I think they can be. And there are bridges, pub gardens, the laughter of children as they walk by the water, and the canals turn us all into curious children that hang in that place between memory and water. Once is never enough for a canal, I reckon. You need to go back and see it again, and sail it again, and smell it again, and touch it again. Canals run through our veins like they stroll through this country, like blood through our veins. The canal tells you stories, the canal sings you songs that hang in that place between memory and water.